The grand observatory of the syncretic concordance was not merely a room. It was a cavernous testament to a billion years of unbroken continuity, a hollowed-out geode suspended in the gravitational null zone of a binary star system. The walls, faceted with crystalline lattice, hummed with the collective psychic resonance of 1,000 distinct species. Yet in this moment, the overwhelming timbre of that resonance was a suffocating, paralyzing silence. High Counselor Xylthos, a being of slender limbs and translucent dermal plates that shimmered with the biological bioluminescence of his mood, stood before the great oculus, his primary sensory stalks trembling with a vibration that had not been felt by his kind since the era of dust. Outside the thick, transparency-shielded viewing port, the galaxy did not look as it should. The stars were there, pinning the velvet curtain of the void in place, but between them, moving like oil across water, was the shadow. It was not a fleet, not in the way the Concordance understood naval doctrine, nor was it a natural phenomenon like the nebulae that birthed their young. It was an absence, a negation of light and logic that had swallowed the outer rim colonies whole, leaving nothing but static on the quantum entanglement bands. They called it the null vector, a force that did not conquer but simply deleted. And for the first time in the recorded history of the Concordance, the distress beacons sent into the abyssal dark of the galactic core had gone unanswered. The chamber was filled with the delegates of the High Synod, creatures of methane and silicon, of fur and chitin, yet the atmosphere was thick with the universal scent of resignation. Xylthos turned his gaze from the encroaching void to the assembly, his internal organs tightening with the gravity of his impending pronouncement. There had been debates, endless cycles of circular logic and diplomatic maneuvering, spanning the last several rotations of the central pulsars. The warrior castes had argued for a final, glorious charge into the maw of the enemy, a suicide burn that would etch their names into the ashes of history. The philosophical castes had argued for transcendence, a mass uploading of consciousness into the subspace strata, hoping the null vector fed only on matter and not on data. But the silence from the neighboring empires, the great powers that dwelt beyond the spiral arm, had shattered every hope. The signals sent to the elder races, those mythical giants who were said to guard the galactic rim, had dissolved into background radiation. Xylthos adjusted the ceremonial mantle across his shoulders, the heavy fabric feeling like a shroud, and tapped the sonic resonator to bring the chamber to order. The sound was a low thrum, deep and mournful, silencing the panicked whispers that drifted like smoke through the air. "Senators, peers, custodians of the flame," Xylthos began, his voice amplified by the architecture of the chamber so that it seemed to originate from the walls themselves. "We have waited. We have broadcast our plea on every frequency, from the hyperthermal bands used by the magma dwellers to the gravity wave encryptions of the voidborn. We have promised wealth, territory, technology, and servitude. We have begged not for victory, but for survival." He paused, letting the weight of the admission settle over them. To beg was anathema to the Concordance. They were the apex of civilization in this sector, the arbiters of law and trade. The Great Array has completed its sweep of the local cluster. The result is absolute zero. There is no responding signal. There is no fleet gathering at the mass relays. There is no energy spike indicating a hyperjump intervention. The silence we hear is the echo of our own extinction. A murmur of despair rippled through the gathered multitudes, a discordant sound of chattering mandibles and weeping gas vents. A representative from the aquatic hegemony, encased in a levitating sphere of pressurized heavy water, drifted forward, its voice a bubbling translation that grated on the nerves. "Then the calculations were correct. The great filter is upon us. We are the last candle in a dark room, and the wind has come." Defeatism was palpable, a physical weight pressing down on the lungs of every breather in the hall. They were ancient, sophisticated, and utterly fragile. Their weapons were elegant, designed for ritual combat and policing actions, relying on precise energy application and negotiation. Against a force that devoured stars and ignored diplomacy, they were children wielding toys. The null vector had bypassed their shields as if they were mist. It had absorbed their plasma fire as a dry sponge absorbs water. The Concordance had forgotten how to fight for survival, because they had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of living. "We must initiate the archive protocol," Xylthos stated, the decision tasting like ash in his mouth. "We will NCH the seed ships into the intergalactic void. Perhaps in a billion years something will find our genetic codes and remember that we existed. It is the only logic that remains." The chamber erupted in protest, not of anger but of grief. To flee was to die slowly, to stay was to die quickly. The logic was sound, yet the biological imperative to survive screamed against it. They were the masters of the spiral arm. How could it end like this? In a cold room, watching a screen, while the universe turned its back on them, Xylthos closed his eyes, all four of them, and prepared to authorize the command that would dismantle their civilization. And then the sensor grid screamed. It was not a communication. It was not a hail. It was a gravitational violation so violent that the holographic map in the center of the room shattered into static before reforming. The floor of the observatory lurched, throwing delegates to the ground, the inertial dampeners overwhelmed by a sudden, impossible spike in mass displacement. Xylthos gripped the podium, his heart's hammering a frantic rhythm. "Report!" he bellowed, his composure cracking. "Is it the null vector? Are they here?" The Grand Overseer of Defense, a hulking creature of rock-like carapace, was frantically manipulating the tactical interface, his stony fingers blurring across the light keys. "Negative, High Counselor, the signature is—" "Wrong. It is not the entropy field of the enemy. It is a spatial tier, a brute force entry. Something is exiting hyperspace directly within the gravity well of the station." "Inside the well," Xylthos cried out. "That is suicide. The tidal forces will tear any vessel apart." "It is not a standard entry," the Overseer shouted back, fear replacing the discipline in his voice. "They are not sliding through the dimensions, they are breaking through them. The fabric of space is fracturing." On the main view screen, the serene backdrop of stars was obliterated by a jagged, bleeding wound in reality. It was not the elegant blue swirl of a concordant slipgate, nor the silent shadow of the enemy. It was a violent, burning red, a scar of Cherenkov radiation and raw kinetic fury. Space twisted and buckled, screaming in the electromagnetic spectrum as something massive forced its way into the material plane. It did not glide, it crashed. A vessel of impossible proportions erupted from the tier, trailing arcs of lightning and venting vast plumes of superheated gas that crystallized instantly in the vacuum. A collective gasp of horror and confusion swept the chamber. The ship was ugly. It possessed none of the smooth curves, biological integration, or harmonic geometry that define the aesthetics of the concordance. It was a mountain of scarred metal, a brutalist slab of gray and black, covered in ablative armor that looked as though it had been hammered into place by primitive gods. It bristled with kinetic batteries, protruding antennas, and massive exposed heat sinks that glowed with the fury of a contained star. It was not designed, it was built. It was a tool of violence, unrefined and unapologetic. The hull was pockmarked with craters, scorched by plasma burns, and patched with plates of different alloys, suggesting a history of endless conflict. It leaked radiation like a wounded beast bleeding out. "Identify," Xylthos demanded, though he could not take his eyes off the monstrosity. "Is it a weapon, a debris field?" "It is a ship, Counselor," the Overseer whispered, reading the data streams that were cascading down his screens. "But the energy readings are chaotic. Their reactor is unshielded by standard metrics. It is practically a captive singularity venting directly into their drive cones. The structural integrity is failing in 1,000 places, yet it holds. The hull composition is carbon, titanium, tungsten, crude alloys." "Who pilots such a thing?" the aquatic delegate burrowed, bobbing in its tank. "It looks like a garbage scow outfitted with a supernova." "The transponder is active," the Overseer announced, his voice trembling. "It is broadcasting a wideband signal, analog, archaic. It is overriding our translation matrix." The static on the main speakers cleared, replaced by a sound that made the delicate sensory organs of the concordance flinch. It was the sound of background machinery, a low, grinding roar of turbines and pressurized hydraulics, the heartbeat of a dying leviathan. And then a voice cut through the mechanical din. It was a voice stripped of all melody, flat, harsh, and exhausted. It spoke a language of hard consonants and rhythmic cadence, which the universal translator chewed on for a moment before spitting out a synthesis. "This is the UNS Prometheus Unbound. Heavy interdictor class, transmitting on open frequency. We picked up your distress call. It was faint. We had to burn out 3 jump coils to get a fix on your vector." Xylthos stared at the audio visualizer, the jagged waveform representing. The alien voice. "Who are you?" he whispered, though the microphone picked it up. "We sent signals to the elder races. We called for the Guardians." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a sound that might have been a cough or a bitter laugh. "The elders are dead, Counselor. They've been dead for 1,000 years. And the Guardians, they don't leave their fortresses anymore." The voice grew harder, more metallic. We aren't them. We aren't the ones you asked for. We're just the ones who heard you. Your vessel, Zalthos stammered, looking at the monstrosity that was currently drifting sideways, crushing a docking spire with its sheer mass. It appears critical. You are leaking radiation. Your structural integrity is compromised. Yeah, well, hyperspace doesn't like it when you bring this much mass through without a stabilizing gate, the human commander replied. We didn't have time to pave the road. Look, we're tracking a massive hostile entity on the periphery of your system. Class Omega Devourer type. Is that your problem? The null vector, the overseer corrected, offended by the simplistic description. It is the end of all things. It cannot be fought. Whatever you call it, the voice said, sounding bored or perhaps just incredibly tired. It's moving to flank your orbital grid. We are positioning to intercept. Transmit your defensive codes so we don't accidentally shoot you, and clear the lane. This ship turns like a brick in gravity. Intercept? Zalthos felt a spike of incredulity. You intend to engage the null vector. With that, it will dismantle you at the atomic level. You must evacuate. We are preparing the seed ships. Cancel the evacuation, the voice ordered. It wasn't a suggestion. We didn't come all this way to watch you run. We came to hold the line. Prometheus out. The connection severed with a burst of static. Zalthos stood frozen. The arrogance was staggering. This primitive, leaking, jury-rigged slab of metal, piloted by a species that sounded as if they were speaking through a mouthful of gravel, intended to fight the darkness that had silenced the galaxy? It was absurd. It was pathetic. They are insane, the aquatic delegate bubbled. They are a primitive species that stumbled upon FTL technology and think themselves gods. They will burn before they even reach effective range. Perhaps, Zalthos murmured, watching the Prometheus Unbound ignite its main thrusters. The engine flare was not the clean blue of ion propulsion, but a dirty, roaring column of nuclear fire that stretched for kilometers. The ship shuddered, shedding loose plating, and began to accelerate toward the encroaching wall of nothingness. But they are the only ones who came. The view from the observatory shifted to the tactical hololith. The null vector was a swarm, a cloud of nanotechnological disassemblers controlled by a hive mind that spanned light years. It did not have ships, it had tendrils. As the human vessel approached the front line, the null vector reacted. A pseudopod of darkness, larger than a moon, detached from the main mass and lashed out. It was a wave of silence, a field that dampened energy and severed molecular bonds. The Concordance fleets had fired particle lances into that darkness, only to see the beams dissipate into nothing. They are entering the kill zone, the overseer reported, his voice flat. Impact in 10 seconds, their shields are... Wait, they have no energy shields. No shields, Zalthos gasped. They have polarized armor plating and magnetic fields, rudimentary. They are going to be annihilated. The dark wave crashed over the Prometheus Unbound. The Synod held its breath, waiting for the signal of the human ship to vanish, waiting for the inevitable disintegration. The darkness swallowed the ship whole, blotting out the angry red of its engines. The graph representing the ship's life signs flatlined. Gone, the aquatic delegate said. As expected, a waste of biomass. A flash of light, brighter than the local star, erupted from within the darkness. It was not a laser, it was not plasma, it was an explosion, a massive omnidirectional detonation of kinetic force. The darkness of the null vector bulged, rippled, and then tore. The Prometheus Unbound burst out the other side of the wave, its hull glowing cherry red from heat friction, debris trailing in its wake. But it was intact. Did they just, the overseer stammered, his sensory stalks retracting in shock. Did they just detonate a nuclear warhead against their own hull to clear the disassembler swarm? They are firing, Zalthos observed, his eyes widening. The human ship was not firing beams of light. It was firing matter. Massive railgun batteries, the size of skyscrapers, accelerated slugs of superdense tungsten to a fraction of the speed of light. The recoil was so immense that the entire ship visibly jerked backward with every volley. The projectiles did not rely on frequency or modulation. They relied on Sir Isaac Newton. They slammed into the delicate, shifting form of the null vector with the force of asteroid impacts. The enemy, adapted to absorbing energy and frequency-based attacks, had no defense against the sheer, brute force transfer of kinetic energy. The tungsten slugs punched holes through the cloud, shattering the command nodes hidden within. Target lock confirmed, The voice of the human commander returned, sounding strained now, background alarms blaring loudly. "We've got a hard shell on the central mass. We're going to crack it, but we can't do it from here. We're going to ramming speed." "Ramming speed," Zalthos screamed. "That is madness. You will destroy your vessel." "This ship was built to die, Counselor," the voice replied, calm amidst the chaos. "Just make sure you record the data. We don't want to have to do this twice." The Prometheus Unbound did not slow down. It accelerated. The engines turned from red to a blinding white-violet as the safeties were disengaged. The ship became a spear of relativistic mass, aiming directly for the heart of the null vector entity. The enemy, sensing the danger of a physical collision of such magnitude, tried to scatter, to disperse its form into the void, but the human ship was generating a gravity well of its own, dragging the entity back together. The impact was silent in the void, but the sensors of the Concordance screamed in sympathy. The human ship struck the core of the null vector like a hammer hitting glass. The release of energy was cataclysmic. A shockwave of disrupted space-time rippled outward, knocking the Concordance station out of alignment. The null vector shrieked across the electromagnetic spectrum, a death knell of a billion synchronized minds suddenly silenced. The darkness shattered, dissipating into harmless background radiation, the cohesion of the swarm broken by the suicidal ferocity of the strike. For a long time there was only the drifting debris. The Prometheus Unbound was a wreck. Its front half was crumpled, fused into a shapeless lump of slag. The engines were dark. Fires flickered in the vacuum, fed by leaking oxygen. "They are dead," Zalthos whispered, feeling a strange, hollow ache in his chest. A species they did not know, a species that looked like laborers and spoke like stones, had thrown themselves into the fire to save strangers. "Wait," the overseer said. "I'm detecting a carrier wave, low power, emergency band." A hiss of static then. "Prometheus to station, target neutralized, our main drive is slagged, life support is at 40%, we could use a tow if you have one spare." The entire High Synod stood in stunned silence. The aquatic delegate had stopped bubbling. The warrior castes were staring at the screen with a mixture of confusion and reverence. Zalthos slowly lowered himself into his command chair, his legs suddenly unable to support his weight. "Get a rescue fleet out there," Zalthos ordered, his voice trembling with an emotion he had not felt in centuries, hope. "Get every tug, every medical transport, every repair drone we have, and bring them to the high spire. They will not dock in the quarantine zones, they will dock at the royal berth." The weeks that followed the collision, as it came to be known, were a period of intense cultural shock for the Concordance. The humans were baffling. When the Concordance rescue teams boarded the Prometheus, they expected to find a crew of millions to operate such a behemoth. Instead, they found a few thousand. They were small, soft-skinned bipeds without natural armor or weapons, fragile in a way that made the Concordance physiologists weep. They bled easily, their bones broke under moderate stress, and their lifespan was a blink of an eye compared to the centuries-old elders of the Synod. Yet their technology and their psychology were terrified enigmas. The Prometheus was not just a ship, it was a flying city of contradictions. The reactor core was exposed, shielding kept in place by magnetic clamps that looked like they were welded on by hand. The corridors were cramped, smelling of recycled air, machine oil, and sweat. There was no art, no music piped in, only the hum of machinery and the scribbling of checklists on paper, actual, physical paper made of cellulose. Zalthos met Commander Hideo Vance in the medical bay of the High Spire. Vance was a man of indeterminate age, his face lined with the stress of high-gravity maneuvers, his hair gray and cropped short. He wore a simple jumpsuit, stained with grease, devoid of the ceremonial medals that adorned the chests of Concordance military leaders. He sat on the edge of a biobed, refusing to lie down, watching the alien doctors with a wary, analytical eye. "Commander," Zalthos said, bowing low, a gesture reserved for heads of state. "The Concordance owes you a debt that cannot be calculated. You saved us from extinction." Vance looked up, his eyes darkened. "Unreadable. We saved the system. The vector will be back. It's a localized manifestation. You just poked the eye of the storm." Zalthos felt a chill. "You know of this enemy." "We call them the Heralds," Vance said, taking a sip from a pouch of water. "They've been chasing us for 300 years. We didn't just pick up your signal, Counselor. We've been tracking their movements. We knew they would hit a high-energy civilization eventually. You were the bait." "Bait," Zalthos recoiled. "You used us." We used the opportunity, Vance corrected, his tone not apologetic but factual. We couldn't fight them in open space. We needed them to commit to a gravity well to solidify so they could feed. When they latched onto your station, they became solid enough to hit. It was a calculated risk. If we failed, you died. If we didn't try, you died anyway. The logic was brutal, cold, and undeniably human. It lacked the flowery ethical justifications of the concordance. It was the logic of a species that had been hunted to the brink and had learned that survival was a game of numbers. "Where is your fleet?" Xalthos asked, trying to understand the scale of this new ally. "Where is your homeworld?" Vance laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "Homeworld? Earth has been gone since the first wave of the Heralds. We don't have a fleet. We have the Prometheus and 2 other orcs scattered in the other arms of the galaxy. We are it. We are the refugees." The revelation struck Xalthos like a physical blow. The ship that had crashed through reality, the ship that had tanked a blow from a god-killer, was not the vanguard of a mighty empire. It was a lifeboat, a desperate, armed-to-the-teeth lifeboat. "You are remnants," Xalthos whispered. "And yet you fight. Why not hide? With your fracture drive technology, you could escape to the void between galaxies." Vance stood up, wincing slightly as his joints popped. He walked to the window of the medical bay, looking out at the glittering, fragile spires of the concordant city. "We tried that. We ran for a century, but the heralds always followed. They feed on order, on complexity. They will eat everything until the universe is back to zero entropy. We realized that running just lets them grow stronger, so we stopped running. We turned our colony ships into breakers. We started hunting them back." He turned to face the alien counselor. "We aren't here to join your concordance, Xalthos. We don't want a seat on your council. We need raw materials. We need tungsten, uranium, and helium-3. We need to patch the Prometheus and get back out there." "You would leave?" Xalthos asked, bewildered. "We can offer you sanctuary. We can build you a new home." "This isn't a home," Vance said, gesturing to the stars. "It's a battlefield, and we are the only ones who know how to fight on it, your people. You're beautiful, your art, your philosophy, your peace. It's worth saving. But you've forgotten how to bleed. We haven't." The cultural exchange that followed was one of friction and awe. The concordance engineers who toured the Prometheus were horrified by the dangerously unstable human technology, yet they could not deny its effectiveness. The humans used nuclear fission for power, something the concordance had abandoned eons ago as dirty. They used projectile weapons because energy shields could be modulated, but a kinetic impactor simply transferred energy regardless of frequency. The humans were the rock to the concordance's scissors. But it was the human crew that fascinated the aliens most. They were loud, chaotic, and emotional. They argued in the mess halls, they played rough games of physical skill, they mourned their dead with weeping and drinking. Yet when the klaxon sounded, they moved with a terrifying synchronization, a hive mind of discipline that rivaled the insectoid castes. They were a species of duality, poets and killers, engineers and vandals. Deep within the Prometheus, however, lay a secret that Vance had not shared. It was located in the heavily shielded Vault 1, a section of the ship that even the concordance scanners could not penetrate. Xalthos, now serving as the primary liaison, sensed the tension whenever the vault was mentioned. He requested a tour, citing the need to understand the ship's full energy requirements for the repairs. Vance hesitated, then agreed. They descended into the bowels of the ship, past the engineering decks, past the armories, into a section where the air was chilled to near absolute zero. The walls were thick lead and gold. "What is in here?" Xalthos asked, his sensory stalks twitching with the taste of ozone. "The reason we really came," Vance said quietly. "The reason we didn't just run to the next galaxy." The doors hissed open, revealing a chamber dominated by a suspension field. Floating in the center was not a weapon, nor a reactor. It was a shard. A jagged, glowing fragment of crystal that pulsed with a light that seemed to RT the eyes. It did not look like matter, it looked like solidified time. "The heralds," Vance explained, his voice low, "are not just eating stars. They are unraveling the timeline. They are trying to reset the universe to a state before life existed. This shard. We found it on Earth before the end. It's a piece of the original substrate, the source code of reality if you want to use a computer analogy." Xalthos stared at the shard. He could feel it in his mind, a hum of infinite potential. "What does it do?" "It anchors us," Vance said. "As long as we have this, the heralds can't fully delete us. They can kill us, but they can't erase our history. But it's dying. The shard is fading. It needs a massive influx of creative energy to recharge. Psychic resonance, the kind of resonance your concordance generates. Xylthos understood. That is why you came to us, not just to save us, but because we are the psychic battery you need. We're parasites, Vance said bitterly. Or symbiotes. We fight the wolves, you keep the fire burning. If you die, the shard goes dark and the universe unravels. If we die, the wolves eat you. We need each other. The revelation shifted the dynamic entirely. The concordance was not merely a helpless victim being saved by a benevolent warrior. They were the essential fuel for the warrior's shield. It was a partnership of necessity. The concordance provided the culture, the mind, the soul of the galaxy. Humanity provided the fist, the wall, the gun. The repairs took 3 cycles. The Prometheus Unbound was refitted, not just with human scrap, but with concordance technology. The hull was reinforced with crystalline lattice armor, lighter and stronger than the original steel. The railguns were augmented with gravity accelerators, doubling their range. The reactor was stabilized with harmonic dampeners. The ugly, brutish ship became something else, a fusion of high and low tech, a monster in a tuxedo. But the peace could not last. The null vector, the heralds, had regrouped. The scout that the Prometheus had destroyed was just a finger of the hand. The hand was now descending. Long-range sensors picked up the anomaly at the edge of the system. This time, it was not a single tear. It was 1,000. The stars began to wink out, one by one, as a fleet of darkness surrounded the binary star system. "They are here," the overseer announced, his voice devoid of hope. "The mass readings are infinite. It is the main host." Vance stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, now integrated with concordance holographic displays. He looked at the swarm. It was a wall of death, a tsunami of entropy. "High Counselor," Vance broadcasted to the surface. "This is it. They're coming for the shard. They know it's here." "We are ready," Xylthos replied from the Synod chamber. "The Great Array is linked to your vessel. We are channeling the collective psychic resonance of 12 billion souls directly into your vault." "That's going to burn out your grid," Vance warned. "Better to burn out than to fade away," Xylthos said, quoting a human phrase he had learned from a mechanic. "We will be your battery, Commander, be our sword." The battle that ensued was not a tactical engagement. It was a brawl. The Prometheus, now faster and tougher, launched itself into the center of the enemy formation. The Concordance fleet, inspired by the human example, rallied. Delicate frigates and cruisers, designed for patrol, flew alongside the human Leviathan, weaving webs of laser fire to intercept the smaller hunter-killer drones of the enemy. But the sheer scale of the Herald swarm was overwhelming. They didn't shoot, they swarmed. They latched onto ships and dissolved them. The Prometheus was covered in black, writhing masses, its hull screaming as the armor was eaten away. "Shields at critical," the tactical officer shouted. "They're breaching decks 4 through 10. We're losing containment on the vault." Vance wiped blood from his forehead. The bridge was shaking so violently that standing was impossible. "Route all power to the fracture drive." "Sir, we can't jump inside the gravity well. We'll take the whole system with us." "We're not jumping," Vance growled. "We're overloading it. We're going to turn the drive into a bomb." "Commander," Xylthos' voice cut in, "we detect a massive buildup in your core. What are you doing?" "The shard," Vance said, his voice strangely calm. "It's fully charged, thanks to you, but we can't win this fight with guns. There are too many of them. We have to change the rules." "Explain." "The Heralds exist because the universe is decaying," Vance said. "They are the cleanup crew for a dying reality, the shard. It's a seed. If we crack it open, it doesn't just recharge the timeline. It reboots the local laws of physics. It pushes the entropy back, but we have to detonate the ship to trigger it." "You will die," Xylthos said. "We're already dead, Xylthos. We died when Earth burned. We've Zeus." "T been too stubborn to lie down. This is what the Prometheus was built for, not to live forever, to bring the fire." Vance looked at his crew. They knew. They had always known. There was no panic, just the grim satisfaction of soldiers who finally see the finish line. "Disconnect the link, Counselor," Vance ordered. "You don't want to be attached when this goes off." "No," Xylthos said. "We will not disconnect. We are a concordance. We do not abandon our allies." "You stubborn alien son of a—" Vance trailed off, a small smile touching his lips. "All right, brace yourselves. It's going to get bright." Vance slammed his hand onto the activation key. The fracture drive, fed by the dying star of the reactor and the infinite potential of the shard, collapsed in on itself. The Prometheus Unbound ceased to be a ship and became a point of singularity. The explosion was not fire. It was light, pure white creative light. It expanded outward, not destroying, but rewriting. It passed through the Concordance fleet, healing hull breaches, recharging cells. It passed through the planet, revitalizing the biosphere. And when it hit the Herald swarm, the darkness screamed. It did not burn, it simply ceased to be compatible with reality. The shadows evaporated like morning mist under a noon sun. The entropy was reversed. The void was filled. The light expanded to the edge of the system and stopped, creating a barrier, a wall of burning starlight that would stand for 1,000,000 years. When the light faded, the Prometheus was gone. Silence returned to the grand observatory, but it was not the silence of the grave. It was the silence of a church after a hymn. Xylthos stood at the window, looking at the space where the human ship had been. There was nothing there but a cloud of glittering dust, swirling in a slow, beautiful nebula. "They are gone," the aquatic delegate whispered, its voice soft. "No," Xylthos said, his heart beating strong and steady. "They are not gone, look." He pointed to the tactical display, the debris field. It was moving, not drifting, but coalescing. The dust was gathering, pulled by a strange, new gravity. In the center of the nebula, a small, bright spark was igniting. It was the shard reborn, and around it, matter was forming. "They didn't just reboot the system," the overseer gasped. "They became part of it." The humans had not survived in the traditional sense. They had become the guardians they had once sought. The dust of the Prometheus formed a ring around the binary stars, a permanent shield against the dark. Years later, the Concordance would build a memorial, not a statue, but a station. A listening post manned by every species of the Synod, trained in the art of war, watching the outer dark. They adopted the human emblem, a hand grasping a torch, as the symbol of their new military arm. They were no longer just the syncretic Concordance. They were the keepers of the fire. And deep in the subspace transmissions, sometimes, if one listened very closely to the static between the stars, past the background radiation and the cosmic hum, one could hear a voice. A rough, tired, human voice cutting through the void. "Prometheus standing by. The line is held." The galaxy was vast and the dark was deep. But for the first time in history, the aliens of the Concordance did not look at the night sky with fear. They looked at it with gratitude, because they knew that out there in the cold and the black, the humans were waiting, and God help anything that tried to crash into them.